Hey folks, David Stewart here. Hope you guys are having a good day. Welcome to the Writestream. I think it's number 15. So someone mentioned that a number was off last week, but I realized that I think I had a number off another week. So I'm calling it number 15 for this series, Writestream Resumption, Series 15, versus the Writestream from 2017 or whenever the last time I did this long series on writing was. I think it was 2017, 2018. Anyway, it's been a while since I've talked about all of these different things in a live stream format for all of you. So I hope you guys are having a great day. Today we're going to talk about exposition and what exposition means. Because it has two meanings, and I want to talk about both of those. So the first one is a thing that you do when you write a story. And the other one is a formal section in a story. Whether it's a piece of drama like a play or it is something else, it'll be an exposition section. So I'll talk about both of those things, really starting with what exposition is in general and then talking about how, I guess, analysts and, people analyzing literature tend to try to format things into different acts, and there's always some problems with plot formats in terms of cramming things, prescribing things into it has to have this kind of act structure, or a movie will have this act structure even though there's no acts in a movie, and what acts were in the traditional stuff like opera and plays is something a little bit different. We'll get a little bit into that, but we'll talk about those different forms of arranging your plot on another live stream. So today we're just going to talk about exposition. It's the thing that can actually kill you. Last week was 15. I think I messed up another number though. I think I actually jumped ahead a number. So I think it's actually correct now. We'll see. I'll go back and look. If I have to, I'll change the names. Maybe the thumbnails too. But we'll see. Anyway. Talking about exposition. So what is exposition? Exposition is really where you are giving the reader or the audience, let's call them the audience so that it fits in any context. You're giving the audience the information that they need to know in order for the events of the story to make sense. This is important. So it contextualizes the events of the story. This can be information that is setting information. It can be character descriptions. Usually it's not plot because that's the actual events, but it could be references maybe to past events that contextualize the events that are happening maybe in the present of the plot, like some history or something like that, some kind of lore that makes the events that you're watching unfold actually make sense. So that's what exposition is. This is something that I think a lot of writers actually mess up quite a bit on, is exposition. What they tend to do, especially in the fantasy genre, is they tend to just overload the reader with details about their imaginary story. I talked about this with world building. And they put too many details in too short a period of time, and the reader can't memorize all of them. And most importantly, doesn't understand how those details are going to relate to the events of the story. So better forms of exposition are to spread those descriptions and to spread that information out over the course of a story and introduce it when it's going to be relevant for the direction of the plot. There's too many examples of this really to list, but if you want probably the most popular one, it's going to be Star Wars. I think I used the Star Wars thing for the thumbnail a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, which uses two different styles of exposition that I'll talk about in a minute. But we slowly gain an understanding as we watch the movies of the Force, for example. They don't try to explain what the Force is in the opening crawl. What they instead do is set up the things you need to know to understand the first scene of the movie. That's really important. So the opening crawl of Star Wars, which is what I call direct exposition, tells you about the conflict. There's, an evil empire and a rebellion, and then the first scene happens so that you're not going, I don't understand anything that's happening in the first scene. You understand all the contexts of what's happening in the first scene. So the drama there is a progression of the conflict that's introduced to you in that opening crawl, and you're immediately engaged in the story. So the most important thing when you're writing a story is to get the reader engaged, get them, or the audience engaged, get them interested in the story. And chances are you're actually not going to do that with a bunch of exposition, but with the interesting exposition that leads to the conflict. You want to get to the conflict as quickly as possible if you want to keep a reader's attention. So I like Alfred Hitchcock's here from Hardwick Bentho. Exposition is a pill that must be sugar-coated, right? We have to find a way for the audience to get the information that's necessary without them being bored or annoyed by it, or overwhelmed with details that they can't understand all at once. So let's talk about now exposition as a formal section in a work. So if you're ever studying Shakespeare, you'll notice that Shakespeare has what's called a 5-act structure, and I've used roughly the 5-act structure in a couple of works. Probably the most prominent is Muramasa, where Muramasa is formally divided into 5 acts. There are 5 acts, and they follow pretty roughly the way that acts are going to go in a Shakespearean play. Okay. The way that those are usually divided is the first act is the exposition, and then the second act is all about creating some event that kicks off the rest of the event. So it's there's some inciting incident that happens. Part of the exposition is we're introducing the characters, we're introducing the setting, where and when the story is taking place, and we're also going to be introducing the beginnings of the conflict, meaning there's a problem that has to be solved. There's something rotten in Denmark, right? There's a problem that has to be solved, and we're going to talk about, or we're going to introduce and show that problem to the audience, and then the second act will have like an inciting incident. The third act is the characters reacting to that. And then the fourth act, they are setting up their strategies for solving the problem that has grown in the second act. And the fifth act is everything collapsing down to where we're back at a state of rest. All the tension of who's going to win the battle, boom, 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 it all comes down to the bottom. Will the tragic hero indeed fall and end up with a tragic end? Or will the tragic hero somehow escape his usual fate? Who's going to win the battle? Is it going to be Cassius or Mark Antony, right? The Tragedy of Julius Caesar is like a good one to look at. A lot of high school kids, I think, still read it. I read it in high school, read it. I actually think even Shakespeare plays even if you read them to like closely analyze what's going on, they're best to watch because they're a drama and they're meant to be watched and acted out. The acting is part of the effect of it. It's not like reading a novel. So I think Shakespeare should be watched, personally. Even if you have a hard time understanding Elizabethan English and you have to get the script out and look at it more closely to have a finer understanding of what's going on, it's good to see those things act out because the character drama will carry through whatever you're doing even without having the best relationship with Elizabethan English. I think you should watch it. That's how those things work. Okay, so an exposition section. When people are talking about books and movies that don't have a formal division into acts the way that Shakespeare did, keep in mind, in the dramatic tradition, acts were not just a way of dividing the plot up and formatting the plot in a certain way. That's a prescriptive way of thinking of it. They were practical divisions, okay? If you have an opera in 2 acts, you might have 2 different sets that are going on. So Orpheus has a set where all the singers and actors are outside doing an exposition section and then having some arias that react to that. Then Act 2, what happens? Orpheus goes to the underworld. So there's a change of the physical setting of what's going on. So in between those acts, you might have the actors and singers resting. You might have people coming out and setting up new set pieces. You might have the orchestra rearranging instruments or something like that, or just taking a break from all the playing. People would be able to get up and get a drink or relieve themselves or whatever it was. Even back in the Baroque period, people had to attend to their natural needs, and so that was a natural break for it. Asking people to sit still for 4 hours was a lot. So they'd sit still for 2 hours or an hour and a half, and then have a break, and then sit still again. So even back in, well, people in the 17th century could probably sit still longer. Yes, that's true, but they're still human beings, so they probably needed to take a break. And even you see this with that dramatic tradition extending into older Hollywood movies, where if they were more than 2.5 hours, there would be an intermission. You would have an overture, which would begin so people could sit down, and then you'd have a break in the middle. Now, with the movie, you're not limited to like sets on a stage that have to be there, but it'd be nice for people to be able to get up and use the bathroom. So a lot of things that are divided into 2 acts, it's done just for practical reasons, right? But in a movie or a book, we might have a section that we call the exposition. That's usually the beginning of the book. And the exposition section is giving the reader, giving the audience, the viewer, whoever it is, even the game player if you're playing a game, all the information that's necessary to understand the conflict and who is involved in the conflict. So what are we going to be introducing to people in the exposition section? Number one is the characters. Even before the setting, the characters are the most important. In a hole there lived a hobbit. It starts with the characters, right? Start with the characters. Then do the setting. Why? Because people are more attached to characters than they are to setting. If we look at Star Wars starts with the setting stuff, the big conflict, right? Then we have Darth Vader and Leia in like the first scene, So we immediately go to character drama. That's why George Lucas called them soap operas, not just space operas, but like soap operas, right? It's a good way of thinking about it, because the character drama is where people are really interested in. And that's why I think Empire Strikes Back is the most sort of well-loved Star Wars film among older Star Wars fans in particular. And that's because it's all about the characters. It's all about characters interacting, characters growing, characters changing. It's all characters, and the plot is actually pretty light, right? What's the plot? What's the conflict holding Empire Strikes Back together? Darth Vader wants to get Luke. That's the conflict, right? But the characters, as far as a middle act of 3 movies, they're all reacting to the stuff that happened in the first movie, all right? And all the changes and all the discoveries that happened in the first movie. So it's one of the lightest, I think it probably is, I would say, the lightest Star Wars movie in terms of plot. But it is beloved because all the characters are doing so much in that movie. That's why it works so well. Start with the characters. Introduce the characters. Then you probably want to move really quickly to conflict. What is the problem that has to be solved? And why does that character want to solve that problem? We don't have to talk about the how yet. The how comes later in the book, but the why is really important, right? So if there's a conflict that's like, why is the evil empire evil? Well, they kill people, right? they restrict our freedoms. They oppress us, right? And especially if the main character is being oppressed by an evil empire, it makes a lot of sense that they would care about solving the problem of the empire, right? Neil says, I've been listening to your streams, was unable to join, but your streams are good with helping my writing. Well, thanks for listening. Thanks for stopping by. Hello. Any tips for powering through the last act besides getting off YouTube? You just got to do it. The main thing is you have to know where you're going, right? So if you've outlined, it's just a matter of following the plan and staying consistent with your work. That's why Keys to Prolific Creativity is all about work habits and not about like, here's the special way that you write. It's like the dramatic tradition is old. 1 million people have talked about it and analyzed it. You can listen to them, and I may still come out with the Storycraft book, I've done a lot of writing towards that end, but the more I write it, the more I'm like, I don't know if the world needs this. So many other people have written so much stuff about it. But really, the problem that I notice most people in terms of failing with their creative goals is that they're not working. Their work habits, their life is not arranged in the appropriate way for them to be able to complete it. They're not setting aside time for work. Their priorities are misaligned often to their disturbance, the wrong word, like distress. They get distressed by how their priorities are misaligned. That's a good way to know if you need to take a step back and be like, do I need to rearrange something about the way I'm doing my life, right? So somebody who's like, man, I'm like fat and out of shape. Well, obviously you need to prioritize diet and exercise. Oh man, I can't finish this book. Well, obviously you need to rearrange your life to finish the book. And it's not like I'm a perfect person who always has my life perfectly organized, but I'm usually able to, with all the disturbing things that happen in a normal person's life, be able to get it back on track and make sure my priorities are properly aligned. And figuring out how to do that. You know, I've done it so many times at this point. I'm 40 years old. So anyway, yeah, it's mostly about work habits. So if your work habits are good, you'll probably finish the book. Where most writer's block happens is the person not knowing what's coming next. They get to a point in the story where they're like, I don't know what happens next. In which case you need to stop and outline at least the rest of the book. But it's why I usually recommend having some sort of plan for your story before you begin writing the first word. Who's doing it? You know the setting, characters, plot, write it out, have a plan, have that document, and go with it. Right? That's really what you want to do. If you're kind of a pants writer, they call it riding by the seat of your pants, or if you are the more, I guess, the kinder way, like the George R.R. Martin Gardner, at least knowing where the story ends is going to help you a lot. And in fact, I think that's probably why like George R.R. Martin has stalled out in his series, is like he's not confident with the ending. The other thing that can happen too, which I haven't talked that much about, but like you can lose interest or motivation or confidence in what you're doing. And so the solution there is to just finish it and know that you're going to fix it with editing. Write down all the problems that you think exist with your draft before you finished it. Finish writing it. Then go back and look at those, reread it, and see if you can fix those problems. Or even better, set your draft aside for a little while and come back to it with fresh eyes after just a little bit of space of time. And you'll probably be able to figure out how to fix things that are wrong. And that can help a lot. What's up, Zimamaru? Let's see here. Neil, for me, I've been outlining by working backwards. I find it helps me that I have a clear endpoint, keeping things as consistent as possible. Yeah, you should at least know what the ending is, because then you can kind of work backwards, right? You have a cool climactic ending in mind. It's really easy to work. But what's going to set that up? Well, I need to do those things. Mech Shark says writing has a similar correlation to coding. People always ask me, how did you learn to do that? It's very, very simple answer. Just start doing it. Yeah. I remember... So I'll tell you how I learned to do some basic codings in like 2 different times of my life. And I'm not like a programmer. I don't consider myself one. Number 1 was when I was in school, or when I was in college. We had this program called Max MSP. You can actually get it as a part of Ableton Live, which is really cool. That this old program I used back in like the year 2000 showed up in my Ableton program for me to mess with. Now, I haven't done all the messing with of Max MSP or Max that I did back in the day, but anyway, I had this program called Max, and it's more or less a visual representation of like C++ object programming, where you can connect different things together with lines, and it can produce different sorts of sound effects. And we used it for music, so I used it to and I had to write some custom code. I'm like, I want it to do this. And it's like, hey, Cycling 74 is like, you can write whatever like custom things you want into it. So I wrote scripts for it. And what I did was I programmed it to take I think it was George W. Bush's inauguration address, or maybe it was like a speech he made after 9/11. And I had it cut up that speech into a bunch of different lengths of sentences, basically using like a random number generator to determine how long. Then it would use the sequence of letters and the length to create another set of numbers, which were then used to create a sequence of pitches. And at the same time, it would read those words out to me. So the way I performed the piece, this is so people would be like, oh, this sounds like postmodern garbage. I'm like, yeah, it's very experimental. Like we did a lot of experimental stuff, and it was fun and interesting. Certainly this was, to me, like a pretty cutting edge way to apply this stuff. But maybe it would, the end result was probably not like super fun to listen to. It was probably just like an interesting thing, an interesting effect, right? And I do that a lot. Like even with my ambient music, I try to produce like, this is interesting. This will have an interesting effect for people. Anyway. So I got a microphone and I would read the words, and the computer would play music in response to that, right? And the music was really weird sounding, but it was, I created all the, programmed all the conditions for what pitches it would generate and how long they would be for and that kind of stuff based on what the speech was doing. And then through various times, I would add effects to that speech, like basically I had the microphone plugged into my pedal board, my guitar pedal board. And so it would create all these different effects, like fuzz would be added. There was a wah pedal thing. There was a harmonizer. And I had the whole signal chain worked out so that at these different times, the program would cue me to change effects, and then it would just go down the line like that. And so I did that, right? I produced that. So I had to learn some basic C. Was it C or C++? I believe it was C++, which some people, I don't know, maybe they view it as a joke. But yeah, so I think it was C++. Then later, I learned some basic Python so that I could use, I think it was OpenRPG, this program environment that you could use for like online Dungeons and Dragons playing. This was back in like 2012 probably. So I learned some Python in order to add some custom things to that. And that was pretty fun. So for me, like a lot of my skills have come from, I have a goal. I have a thing I need to do. I need to learn how to do it, right? I have to learn how to do maps. Like I want some fantasy maps. I need to learn how to draw them. And so I analyzed, how Tolkien did his and how different people did theirs. And I came up with a style and I practiced it. And then I made maps, right? And so now I can make fantasy maps whenever I want to. Same thing with like music. I want to do this. And I still have this stuff in mind, right? Like I'm still slowly working towards this thing I have in my mind. That's really, I can't say it because it's just in my mind. It's not like a words thing. It's a music thing. It's a sound in my mind. Well, I have to learn how to like operate all the looping software that I use to produce that. So, I have my push 3 here, my push 2's over there. But, I use Ableton Live to do all that. So it's like I got to learn a lot of the ins and outs of the software to do that. Anyway, it's cool that Maximus P showed up in Ableton Live. I have a goal, and then I go figure out the skills that are necessary to learn that goal. What it's like, okay, I'm broke and I need to put out books. I can't afford a book cover, right? So what do? Do I just do no cover? Like, okay, how about I learn to make them? All right. Let me go figure out how to do graphic design. I'll go teach myself graphic design enough to do book covers, right? I have friends who are like real graphic designers that, they operate in a different world. They're like, here's this logo I designed. I'm like, that looks really great. It's like, I know how to do fonts on book covers and stuff. And I know what design you need to have for the market, right? That's part of it. It's like studying what the market likes for design. What things will look good to readers and look appropriate to readers and what colors, you have to go learn all those things. So you go learn those things and then boom, you're able to apply them and, make money with them in a sense, right? And that's the thing is like, if I make my own book cover, it's like I'm paying myself $500 because I'm saving $500. And that also means that like, I don't have to sell a lot of books, right? And I there's a couple books that's like, I know that people are probably not going to buy this book. So if I'm buying a book cover, it becomes completely a vanity project. It becomes vanity publishing. Whereas if I just make the book cover and I pay myself nothing for that, right? Then every dollar I earn from that book is pure profit. And boy, I like that, right? Let's see what else here. A lot of it for me is just pushing through, and here's another tip too, right? So it's, eliminate distractions is helpful. There's something else that a lot of people get benefit out of, and that is putting on sound. Not necessarily music, but like sound. So a lot of the stuff that I play, like this, this is not meant to be an intrusive sort of piece, right? Even though there's like a little jazz improv in the middle of this, but putting on something that when you need to disengage from the work, and actually this is, I I don't know if I talk about this in the book, but it's really important because I think people approach focus. They approach focus in a way that it leads them to distress. They're like, I need to sit down and focus for an hour. I'm like, you're not going to do that without drugs, right? Go like snort some Ritalin or get some meth. And yeah, you could probably focus intensely for an hour, but that's not human, right? So you need to have ways to disengage. You can either plan breaks or, you can have a soundtrack on. And so when you need to stop and think, then you can listen to the music for a minute. And when you need to write, the music kind of goes to the back of your mind, and the music has the added thing of like, you can't hear the dogs. Like, I can hear my kids right now. So if I wanted to write right now, I would probably put on headphones, have some sort of maybe like, go look up the Andy Othling channel and like put on one of his songs, put on a playlist of that stuff. Listen to that while I work. I almost never listen to music that's interesting while I work. Like, I hate to say like my music is boring, but I never listen to like metal, right? Like Stephen King listens to metal when he writes, and that works for him. So it's whatever works for you. Like no one is the same. We're all different human beings with different needs and stuff, right? So if you are the kind of person that can focus better having Cannibal Corpse on, then go for it. Listen to Cannibal Corpse. If I put on Death or Cannibal Corpse, I will stop writing and just listen to the music. Some jazz I can do that with, like, I don't know. Honestly, some of the more noisy stuff, like if I put on, Bitches Brew or something. Bitches Brew to me is like, it just kind of goes in the background. Right? It's just such a mess. I'm not a fan of Bitches Brew. I kind of like it, but that's a Miles Davis album from like 1970. He had another one called On the Corner. It's his fusion era. And it's really weird because like most people, when they think of jazz fusion, they're like, Weather Report. And it's like, Weather Report is so good compared to Bitches Brew, right? Like, Herbie Hancock and Weather Report is like, that's the stuff people like. They go listen to Bitches Brew and they're like, is this fusion? It's like, there's guitars in it. What the hell is going on? It's more avant-garde than it is like jazz rock fusion. It's like a jam band and a jazz band got together and like did drugs and then didn't really care about structure. That's Bitches Brew and On the Corner. They're not, I have a certain affection for those albums. I really do. I have a certain affection for them, but that affection is more like the weirdness of it and not me thinking it's that good. Like Miles on it, he's buried half the time, or what he's playing is like doesn't fit at all the other sounds. I can definitely say like if you skip all of Miles Davis's music after about 1970, you're probably not going to miss out on much. Like his stuff from the 80s is there's I'm trying to remember there's an album he has from the 80s it's like good despite Miles Davis. It's like, wow, this is a good record with bad trumpet playing on top of it. Because the whole thing, Miles didn't write it. Like it was all written by the bass player who was like a really good musician. And you listen to it, you're like, man, this has like a groove to it. Sounds, and then you hear the trumpet and you're like, I don't know what's going on. But Miles is Miles. He's allowed to do weird stuff if he wants to. You earned it, right? Do you ever think it's worth abandoning a story if you feel it's just not coming together despite investing a lot of time and effort into it? Okay, this is such a good question. Right? So you have the sunk cost fallacy on one side, and then you have like Ray Bradbury and Stephen King on the other side, right? So the sunk cost fallacy is, I can't abandon this. I have put so much effort into it. If you need to abandon it, it's okay to. The other side of it is like, you have to finish what you start because that's going to build the pattern that you want to build, which is to finish the things you start. This is why Stephen King's like, you have to finish a book in a season. You're going to lose the energy of the book after you finish the season. Now, I've done books where like I started them one year, had things massively interrupt that, had to come back to them another year, had things interrupt that, and then come back to them like a third year, and then finally the book is finished. And it's not even a long book. It's just I get interrupted, and then it's like, oh, I have to do this other project. Oh, I have to do this, and I'll get back to that later, right? That happens. It took me like 3 or 4 years to finish my second album because recording just kept being interrupted by other things. I moved, then I moved again, right? I had to completely change business strategies because of changes with the YouTube algorithm. I had to completely change business strategies because of the collapse of the book market. I had to completely change, right? So like having to change, it's like my side project, which is doing all this music, this instrumental music, had to be even more of a side project. But as a result, I think the return album is kind of interesting. It's a little bit different from what it would have been had I just recorded the whole thing in a month or two, because the recording was spread out over such a long period of time. It develops along a different path. It's a very guitar heavy album. Everything is in standard tuning. Everything's guitar, so it has a weird unity to it. But sometimes you have to do that. So I think realistically, what you have to think is, how close are you to finishing? If you are reasonably close to finishing, you just got to finish up. You got to push it out and make it happen. Even if it's something that you put in a drawer to edit later, do your best to finish. However, if you're aware that like this is not a good story and it's bad and the conclusion is bad, I think it's okay to then go work on something else. You can always try to finish it later. That's true. But, I've had to kind of abandon projects in the past because they just weren't doing what I wanted them to do, or like my concept wasn't matching my skill. Like I didn't have the skill to execute the concept. And so I had to come back to those later. This Moon Song, it's a trilogy now, but there'll be more books out kind of in that series this year, hopefully. We'll see what I can do with my current like severe limitations on time. But they started as a really massive book that I wrote in like 2012 and 13, I think. 2013 is where I did most of the writing, I think, of that. And I had to pause on the story because I had done so much growth as a writer. I realized how bad I was doing. And so I had to stop and go back and rewrite them later on, right? So, it's easy to get too bogged down in the sunk cost fallacy. Like we have to put out something, we've invested money in it. But sometimes things can't be saved. And I can't give you an easy razor for figuring out like whether something is doomed or whether it's something you should finish up. You should always do your best to finish everything you start, though. You really want to develop the habit of finish the piece. If you're drawing something, finish out the drawing. Even if you don't want to show it to someone else, at least you learned from that process. So when you start the next one, you're building on that, right? This is the other thing too, is like if you never finish your first book, you'll never know how to finish a book, right? You got to finish it so that you can stop and assess what you did and take note of maybe where you made a mistake or where it could be better. And then next time around, finish that or go back and edit it correctly and fix it. And so usually what I tell people is like, it's better to have a bad first draft than no complete book. People lose confidence. They lose confidence of what they're doing. And then try to finish your first draft. Do your very best to finish it. And if it goes in the drawer, it goes in the drawer, and you look at all the time you spent. It's not, oh man, I can't believe I sunk extra into this garbage. It's like, I'm learning. I never throw away the learning mindset. Every time I do a project, I look at like, what am I learning and what can I do better for next time? And what did the execution end up being particularly hard? Where did the execution falter and become really difficult? And we'll just try to do that better next time. Maybe I need to plan that section better. Maybe I need to outline deeper in some part. Maybe I just need to slow down with the prose writing, or maybe I need to do something else different, right? Maybe I just need to reschedule my life better. Yeah, that's part of it too. So yeah, I would do my best to finish it, even if you think it's going to be bad. Try to finish it, because then maybe in the future you can edit it. So it could be, but like it could be worth abandoning. But do your best to not. Yeah, Stephen King has abandoned his books and had to come back to them later. you know, or not abandon it, but like finish the book that you think is bad and then come back later to write a better version of it. Some people do complete rewrites, like they rewrite from page one. And while I never want to do that, editing the third Moonsong book was like so much had to be fixed. I'm like, it would have been better had I read the first draft, kind of written down, made a document that put in order all my thoughts for how I actually wanted the story to go, and just started on page one again and written from page one to the end. That would have been better. It would have been a lot less work versus, doing like all this surgery to fix every nuance of the story to get it to be presentable and function in the way that I want it to. I had to do a crap ton of editing, ton of cutting, ton of rewriting. And every time you cut, you're like, man, do I really need to cut this? I mean, okay, do I need to replace it? Do I need to cut it? Can I just edit it, right? Because the events during that part were like so all over the place in my first draft. It's like I really had to cut them down and focus them and get that plot tight from beginning to end. And I think I did it. I think the third Moonsong book ends up being really good. But that was the hardest editing job I've ever done in my life, was like those 65,000 words, right? Not even 65,000 words is a lot, but it's like not, it's not like editing a 150,000 word book, right? That was like the hardest editing job I've ever done, was that. Because I had written the story as an early writer, as someone without experience, and I made a lot of mistakes, and I set it up in bad ways, and I just did dumb things where I was like, I'm doing the same sequence like 3 times in a row without realizing it, because I'm just like trying to get characters to move around through set pieces. It's like, no, we'll cut those out, take the important parts of those, rewrite it into one sequence. It's like you lose 30,000 words and then you take a 30,000 word section, you keep 3,000 of it, and it's spread out over 15,000 new words. Right? That's what I ended up doing throughout the book. It was so much work, but at least I didn't make any of the mistakes I made the first time. At least I didn't make those again. Right? Someone asked, is that an Ibanez back here? This is a Fender. This is my custom Fender. Used to have humbuckers, and then I put EMGs in it. This is what I do like most of my stuff on the Zool channel with, is this guitar now. Which is weird. I did so much experimentation last year with different guitars and things like that. It's tuned in E flat, which is weird. I kind of like the strings feel correct with the gauges that I'm using for E flat, but it doesn't really, it makes me think too much when I'm adding in piano parts. I'm like, wait, okay, everything's a half step down. E minor, I'm in E flat minor. You have to do a lot of things like, how many flats is E flat minor? I'm gonna call up my band teacher. How many flats is E flat major? E flat minor. E flat minor is, wait, is 6 flats? Okay, I'm just gonna play the black keys. Pentatonic, baby. All right, yeah. This is my custom Fender, my American Fender, and then I have my custom Telly that I do a lot of stuff with. You don't see right here. I'll turn the camera. That's not an Ibanez either. And I have several Ibanezes. This is like the ultimate guitar. I have to stand up to get it because I don't want to break it. The Parker Fly. The Parker Fly. This guitar is something else. This is like the best guitar. If you're like, what's the best electric guitar? I'm like, they don't even make them anymore. It's the Parker Fly. That's like best electronics, best tone, like best feel. It looks cool. Looks like something from the future, even though this guitar's from 1997. Which when I bought it, it was like a vintage 1997. Like 1997 is a vintage instrument now. 1997 is a vintage instrument. I'm getting old, right? Yeah. Last week I got put into timeout for some reason. So I couldn't ask, but what about gender roles in class systems and world building? Could you touch on that? Yes. I'll talk about something that like other authors have done too. I use the Pomodoro technique and listen to lo-fi. Yeah, dude, lo-fi is great. It's something that's just has a consistent sound that will help you to when you need to disengage from what you're doing, you can focus on that. And when you need to stop focusing on that, it's really easy to disengage from lo-fi music. So lo-fi is a great thing to listen to while you're writing. I listen to that, ambient stuff. Mostly, a lot of dungeon synth. I like dungeon synth, and I like weird stuff too. I like to listen to like Steve Reich. I love Steve Reich's music. It's so weird. I'm like, I don't know if anyone else on planet Earth is a fan of this guy, but I am. If there's one guy on Earth that like still is going to listen to his music, it's going to be me. Okay, gender roles and world building, because we're talking about exposition a little bit. The hard part is going to be like, how are you going to tell the reader about what those are? Most writers tend to have a pretty like straightforward way that they do that. So if you're writing in a medieval setting, pre-modern setting, let's say, you can expect the gender roles to be pretty standard. If you're playing World of Warcraft, then it's purely an aesthetic thing. So you have to ask yourself, like, for people that, if you're reading, for example, Steven Erikson, he kind of tries to do both of these at the same time. He tries to make sex an aesthetic thing and also be impactful. So like men and women are in the army, which is something that would make no sense in a pre-modern setting for a multitude of reasons. Especially, we're just different, right? But especially in a pre-modern setting without birth control and hormones and all kinds of other things, women are just not suited to be in the army, except maybe as camp followers. In other words, like the Romans would have camp followers full of prostitutes that the soldiers would proposition, right? And that they viewed them as useful for that. It's like they'll make food, you can buy the food from them. The men can have prostitutes or something, right? They have access to sex. But like actual mixed units would have made no sense in any kind of pre-modern setting. But Steven Erikson does it in the Malazan books. But at the same time, he tries to have women have the impact of being women. So there's like women who are unintentionally pregnant. There's women who are soldiers somehow and yet get raped. My kids are having a great time, apparently. So yeah, he tries to do both. Like he tries to do both at the same time. You have something in Starship Troopers, like I'm thinking of the movie where you have like men and women showering together, like total gender parity. But it comes off as weird because we still don't have gender parity as much as people would like to have eliminated sexism. It's like men and women showering together would not really be socially acceptable in most Western societies. Although like if you're going to Finland, I guess there'll be men and women maybe in a sauna together. Like they're more comfortable with that. Or like Germans are more comfortable with that. But like, it's going to come off as weird. Like, why are they there? Why are they doing that? Like everything else, we tend to sex segregate. So, yeah. So how are you going to expose that is the main thing. How are you going to talk about it? So there's two ways, direct and indirect exposition. So let me use this to kind of leapfrog into another topic I wanted to talk about besides the formal division of exposition. So let me finish up what I was saying about the formal division of exposition before I got sidetracked by the chat. So a lot of times people will say that there's like an exposition section. So that exposition section is just where you're setting up all the information that they need to know kind of towards the beginning. It's where you're introducing characters and you're introducing the setting and you're introducing why the characters are doing something. It can be very short. Like ideally you want exposition at the beginning of a story to be as short as possible and so you can move into the event sequence. Anything that is not necessary to understand the beginning of the conflict, you can put later in the book. You can talk about those relevant things when you get later on in writing the book. And that's usually what I recommend. Get to the conflict, get to the setup as quickly as possible, put the other stuff later. Versus having the first like fifth of the book be exposition. You're going to bore most modern readers with that. And moreover, even in an exposition section in Shakespeare, you have things that are moving forward. You have actions that are happening. So it's not purely exposition. They call it the exposition section. That doesn't mean it's purely exposition. It just means that there's lots of exposition in that section. It's the setup for the story. Okay. So the next thing is, how do you expose gender roles in like a fantasy setting? You can show them happening. Okay. That's the main one. That's an indirect form of exposition. This is the form of exposition you're mostly going to want to use in a story because it's inobtrusive and it gets the point home quicker versus you just telling the reader about something. And it can be sprinkled throughout the book to give the reader the information they need kind of later in the story. But keep in mind, you need to have the relevant stuff leading up to the event where we need to have that stuff. We need to have things that are relevant for events. So if some information about gender role is relevant for an event that happens, you have to have that happen before the event so that people understand the context of the event. So let's imagine a society where like women, like Gore, like novels of John Norman's Gore, where women are like captive kind of slaves, right? We'll just say that like women are slaves. Okay. How do you show that? Well, you have the character show up in the alternate Earth or whatever, and then the first thing he sees are like slave girls in chains, and he's like, "What's this?" He's like, "Those are my slaves." "Where are your slaves?" I don't have any." "Oh, you must be really poor." Okay. All right. So right away, we could get the big thing about how the gender roles work in that environment by just showing that happening. You can have characters dining and the woman is serving them, and the way the man treats the woman is going to tell the reader how the gender roles work. If it's men and women sitting down talking as equals, then obviously those gender roles are not as not as novels of Gore kind of thing, right? Or the way characters talk to each other tells the audience a lot about their relationships. That's indirect exposition. Direct exposition is where you just tell the reader something. And the best thing to use for direct exposition is, especially if you're writing a book, you can just do it in narrative form. You just do it in the prose section. You don't have characters try to talk about things they already know. You just say it. Hobbits did this. Hobbits love to give gifts. And chances are every single week they would know somebody with a birthday and had a chance of getting a gift, whatever Tolkien said about that. Now, he could have had the characters, like a modern editor might be like, well, you should have the characters explain. It's like, it gets awkward. You start having what I call expositional dialogue, which is where the dialogue is really directed towards the viewer or the reader and not towards the characters. Normally, character drama is characters and characters. Dialogue exposition is like, hello, audience. Let me talk to you. Yes, John, have you heard about how we have to pay taxes on April 15th? Yes, I've known that because I live in this society. Isn't it interesting how the tax deadline is April 15th? Yes, April 15th. Like, people don't talk about that, right? Like, you just know that and do it. So it feels awkward. And this is one of the things in like The Phantom Menace is you have characters sitting there telling each other things they already know. For the benefit of the audience, because frankly there was too much. The conflict was too complex to set up in the role. So you have to put more of the exposition later in the film, and because it's a visual medium, you don't have prose. You can't insert a narrator because you did 3 movies without a narrator. You have to kind of do it through dialogue. It's the only option that's left. So direct exposition, you do that through prose, and you can just tell the audience whatever they need to know. It's super efficient and quick. And what I would probably do for that is like when you need to really just give a lot of flavor quickly, it's way more efficient to just tell the audience in the prose than to try to have characters explain it to each other or show it. Like, how are hobbits going to show that they get that they get lots of birthday gifts on other people's birthdays, right? You have to just kind of say it because they wouldn't point it out because it's part of their normal society. Like, they wouldn't say, this is a standard thing, is getting gifts. I mean, you could do it. It'd be a lot less clear, though. That's the other benefit of direct exposition, is you can be crystal clear with what you mean for the audience to know. You can say, things are like this. This spaceship works this way. This person is like this. Now, there is a line that you can cross when it comes to character exposition. That line usually is character descriptions that are not physical, but have to do with their temperament. Now, I break this rule. Rules are made to be broken, right? I talk about how, you could talk about a character's reputation directly. She had a reputation for being hot-headed. Okay. Does that mean she's hot-headed? Yeah, we're kind of saying that, right? But telling somebody how a character feels rather than showing how they feel is where you are. This is a more technical thing. It's where you're basically saying something that you should be showing. You're telling instead of showing when you should be showing. There's times to tell and times to show. Don't believe people that are like, show, don't tell, as like an absolute rule, because then you'll make it way harder on yourself. Tell when it's best and appropriate to tell, and show, like, how do you show a character's mad? They act in a way that shows that they're mad. They say things that would show that they're mad. They use angry, terse words. They cuss, right? All those things show anger. You don't need to say, John said angrily. Avoid adverbs too. Like, adverbs are fine. It's another thing. Like, never use adverbs. Well, use adverbs appropriately. Ask yourself if there's a better verb if you're going to add adverbs. But, you can use adverbs if you need to. Okay. So, yeah. You want to not cross over that line where you're like, he was a dirty, rotten scoundrel. Okay. Now, plenty of people break that rule, right? Especially in the pulp era, you had stuff that's like, he was a right bastard or something like that. Yeah, just you're quickly giving some character stuff. But physical traits, it's really, yeah. Okay, let's actually talk about that for a minute. What physical character traits are important to talk about? Should you talk about all of them? Well, it's important to talk about the ones which are relevant. It's important to talk about the ones which are relevant. And it's hard to know exactly which ones are going to be relevant depending on what kind of thing you're trying to present for the audience. Now we'll use another popular book. We'll use Twilight. Bella Swan. She talks about her own physical appearance. She has dark hair and pale skin. She's jealous of girls with nice tans and pretty blonde hair, maybe. So why are those character traits relevant? I've talked about this a bunch of times. It's just a really great example of how to do what I'm talking about, that it tends to work really well with female audiences. Not trying to be sexist there, but that's just how you're going to see it in romance novels. And Twilight is ultimately like a paranormal romance at its heart. And that is, you have the character present their traits as negative when they are in neutral. So they feel not pretty, even though their traits are not really going to be pretty or ugly, right? Oh, hello, cat. Oh, greetings. I'm streaming. You need a pet. Okay. You can't see it. Come here, cat. Come here. Come here. Here she comes. You can see a cattail. Here's the cat. This is the Aurora cat. She's very little. She's purring. She decided now is the time she needs pets. Okay. So yeah, talking about Bella Swan's character traits. Why do we talk about dark hair? You're going to walk all over my synthesizers. Okay. Great. Some of those cost a lot of money. All right. Yeah, so pale skin is neither beautiful nor ugly. Dark hair is neither beautiful nor ugly. There are beautiful women with pale skin, beautiful women with dark hair, beautiful women with pale skin and dark hair, and there's beautiful women with dark skin and light hair. Hey, kitty. She needed pets. She needs pets. Yeah. Right, so those are neutral. What matters is that the character, because it's written in first person, is telling you how she feels about those traits. That way, she can actually occupy this like Schrodinger's area of ugly and pretty at the same time. And this is important because, especially female readers, they tend to They tend to like want to experience things in the first person. They imagine themselves as the character, and that's a easy. I don't want to imagine myself as ugly, but I also know that I'm not a 10, right? So that it fits perfectly, right? It's Schrodinger's ugly. So those physical traits really matter, right? The fact that Galadriel is very tall matters because we're talking about like an ancient elf that's old, super, super, super old, right? We don't know everything about her, but that physical trait gives an impression of majesty. They were very tall, and the Lord no less so than the lady, right? Or maybe it's the lady no less so than the Lord. It's like that gives you an impression, makes an impression. This short guy and a very tall woman. She's majestic, she's powerful, right? So for most women, we think of them as like small, dainty beings. We make a woman tall, she automatically has more authority, more authoritas. Galadriel, when you meet her, she has authoritas, right? She has authority, personal majesty by being taller than other people. It matters. Okay. So you need to talk about the stuff that matters and skip the stuff that doesn't matter. Aragorn has gray eyes, right? It's because he's from Numenor. And dark hair. You know, he's different from the Rohirrim. So these different groups of people. Sometimes authors make the mistake where they talk about every physical description of a character. They were tall. They had a thin face. They had a hook-like nose. They had dark eyes, brooding brows, right? And you can list all those off in really quick succession, and that can be fine. I've done that. The problem is what's relevant there. You want to give an impression to the reader of who that character is. So if the character is obese, why does their obesity matter? Well, because they're a glutton. So if we meet a character who's fat, we automatically know that he's going to be eating more than his share and drinking more than his share and be a little bit obsessed with the pleasures of the flesh. He's going to have his main weakness be gluttony. So physical character traits absolutely do matter, and you do need to talk about them. So Elmore Leonard's advice about like never use physical character traits, to a certain extent, that is wise, in that the physical character traits matter less than the way the character acts. What the character does matters the most for who the character is. But the physical traits will immediately set up as an exposition thing. Give the reader or we're talking about prose here, so give the reader information that will make them have the correct context for and the correct expectations for who the character is, and the character will reveal more subtleties about their character as they go on in the story. There you go, Cat. So pick which ones matter. Obesity is going to matter. Is the character tall and strong? That matters because they might be very heroic. They have an impression on other characters. Whether they have dark or light hair or pretty or ugly, you can say that. You can just call a woman beautiful. You don't have to list every trait. But it might be good to like list a unique trait that the other characters perceive as special. Like, she had this intense stare with these like dark eyes, like coals or something, right? All of that stuff is going to be good flavor that you can add into your story that will help readers know what the characters are doing. Do you also think writing fight scenes is mind-numbingly tedious and the complete opposite of reading them in terms of excitement? I often find reading fight scenes to be boring. I've talked about fight scenes, right? Like Fritz Leiber, I like Fritz Leiber as an author. I really don't like his fight scenes. Other people love them. I find them boring. I find them boring because he's telling you too much stuff and describing them in ways that aren't clear to me. So it's too many details, right? What we care about with action is what the result of the action is. So we want to give some details for maybe how the action's happening, how that matters for like how the character is maybe fixing a problem in an unexpected way. But, he turned his sword 30 degrees to the left and thrust at the lower left hip of his opponent, and the opponent slipped to the side and knocked his blade aside with the flat of his blade. Like after a while, that gets tedious to read as well as write. So I think know what the outcome is, and then what is the most important thing to describe in a fight. That's not exposition. That's just an event. But what readers care about with events is how that event affects the final goal, the main conflict, like the final plot goal. How does that event move us closer to it or further away from it? How does it make the character get closer to failure or closer to success? The context of the event is what readers really care about, the resolution. And otherwise, you're just putting off that resolution in different ways. And you can put off the resolution with much more interesting ways than having a long sequence of fight events. Like, I want this duel to be tense. Let me write a page and a half about how their swords interacted. That's actually boring. What you would rather do is write a page and a half about how the characters felt and the tense atmosphere, something somebody said which brought the tension up, which is like, if you lose, I'll kill your children, right? Or something, right? Like, you talk about the things that are leading up to it. And I go back to Alfred Hitchcock. There's no terror in the bang, only in the anticipation of it. So what you want to do with fight scenes is get to the result of the fight fairly quickly, right? But you want to have the lead up to the fight be where the tension is. How does this fight matter? Why is the character drew his sword, and with a sudden realization, his old wound tore open in his side. He held still, trying not to reveal the depth of the wound, lest his opponent take advantage and strike while he was still adjusting. But it hurt so sharply it took his breath away. Right now, I'm not describing the fight. All this stuff is stuff going up to the fight. That's what's going to keep the reader like on the edge of their seat, not like a bunch of descriptions of how the swords worked and stuff. All that can actually come off as very boring. And I get it. Like, maybe you've studied HEMA and you want to put that into your book. It's like, that is great. Someone out there will probably like that. So, but for most readers, they're going to be like, what happens? Better to spend the time hyping up the anticipation of it. Which one of your books, according to you, is your best work? All of them are the best. Bro, your live stream is gospel, and you talk of metal music while also writing books. You're my hero as of today. Well, thanks for stopping by. I'm not going to tell you which book is the best, right? They're all different. They're like children. They're better and worse in different ways, and it just depends on what the reader wants to read. Do you want to read like a classic epic fantasy thing? It's like Water of Awakening. Do you want samurais? Brahmasa, right? Do you just want a short, like, blast your face off action experience? Voice of the Void. Do you want a compact, creepy horror story with a big twist ending? It's Eyes in the Walls. Depends what you want, because I write in a lot of different genres. So, another member for the Cult of Stuart. A tip I use to keep myself motivated is that whenever writing some passages prose, I use Pomodoro, and when I stop mid-sentence. Stopping mid-sentence helps me figure out where to pick up next. It makes me focus on the next thing instead of figuring out what to say next. That's interesting. I always stop at like big areas if I can. I never stop mid-sentence. I like reading blow-by-blow combat, but a lot of other people seem to hate it. Brandon Sanderson immediately comes to mind. Yeah, I think we want to have the anticipation. The anticipation is more effective than blow-by-blow. Blow-by-blow is not tense in and of itself. It's just an obvious prolonging of revealing the outcome. And readers, another thing to take note of is that readers read books in ways that may surprise you. A lot of readers would just skip the action sequence. They'd be like, what happens? And they just skip 4 paragraphs that you spend a bunch of time writing. Great. And this is a piece of advice from Elmore Leonard. Whatever readers tend to skip, you should probably skip writing. So if the readers are going to skip a bunch of prose, maybe you should skip the prose. And readers almost never skip dialogue, right? Maybe if you're writing a long, tedious action sequence with blow-by-blow combat, you should skip that. If writers tend to... Yeah, there might be some reader who... I mean, not writers. If readers tend to skip it. There might be some reader who really loves that. And that's for them. But Would he hate your book worse because it didn't have that? Think of the optionality there. Suppose there's a reader who loves like blow by blow sword combat. Would he put your book down because you didn't do that? Now have had readers complain that my action is too fast. So I had a duel in Needle Ash. It's under a bunch of books. I'll get it. Right. Here's the hardback, like the complete edition. It has all 3 books in it. Okay. So there's a duel. In fact, there's an illustration by Brad Lynn. A guy I knew through like HEMA channels and wanted to give him a shot. Said, hey, would you be interested in illustrating this book? And I'll pay you some money. Basically a vanity thing because there's not, you don't actually gain any sales by having illustrations. Okay. That's a business thing. That's why I don't have a lot of illustrations in my books is that, here's an illustration of the duel. Boop, boop, boop. Kind of fun. All right. You don't gain sales by having illustrations. It's just a thing for fun, which I like doing, And these ones came out pretty good with black and white. They're simple and they really show the action that's in play. Okay. So the duel happens fast. Why did it happen so fast? It's like they set up, they talked, and then like I did a blow by blow, but it was like there was like 3 actions and then boom, one of them was dead. The reason I did that is I wanted it to be really realistic, and that's how duels actually happened, right? Duels were not like Star Wars where people had long dramatic scenes of talking and swinging lightsabers. Duels were like, especially, probably, if you want to read a manga, I think there's an anime. Actually, there's an anime of it. It's called Shirigui, Death Frenzy, right? And that's what it means. You get a better sense of how duels actually worked with like samurai. But they worked the same way and with small sword combat or with pistols. What was a pistol duel like? You turned and you had one shot and you hoped you killed the other guy. It's quick. If you're dueling with a small sword, it was like ding, 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 exchange. Think about how quick an exchange is with sport fencing. Slap, 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 point. All right. So good duelists, it's going to be something similar. Clang, 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 other person's dead. So I did it that way. I had a couple moves and then one guy killed the other guy. Boom. Right? I wanted to be realistic and I wanted to get to the point. So I spent all my time on the anticipation of it and then had it happen very quickly. And it also shows something, which we hadn't seen with the character Michael up until then, is his competence. We'd seen some of his competence as like a military leader, but we hadn't seen him just be like a badass warrior. So he like doesn't flinch from the duel and he kills like an immortal swordsman like that, right? He's just like, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to have a plan. I executed it. I won. Like, yes, I am competent. We hadn't had a competent moment like that for him. So that was his like high competence warrior moment where he's not just a commander. He's not just a general. He knows how to use a freaking sword, Joe Abercrombie writes incredible fights, but I try to imagine him writing it and it seems like misery. I'm not a huge fan of him as a writer, but everybody likes different stuff. Trying to be a John Wick screenwriter. The screenwriter probably just wrote the dialogue and was like, John Wick kills him in a flurry of bullets or something, right? Whatever it is. The action in the 3rd book was some of the best written action I've ever read. Glad you put in the work to produce it. Thank you. I think the key to writing blow by blow is making it flow well. Flow by flow, if you will. Yeah. And each action has to be clear and you know what it does and you know how it changes the stakes, right? So with a duel, it's like going off balance. Uh-oh, I'm in a bad position. How am I going to recover? I narrowly missed the blade, right? Like those are good things to do. Was there ever a point in time where you felt like it was pointless to write because of how many thousands of great books already exist? Well, maybe I feel like that right now. Here's the thing. Yes, there's already lots of great books. Writing is it's communicative. It's from me to you. It's not just a thing that exists outside of me. It exists outside of me once I write it. Like, this thing exists. People can read it. but I'm communicating something from me to the person who reads it. It's always personal. So if you understand that it's always personal, yes, there are other great books out there, but there's no great books written by you communicating how you feel and what you want to another person to know, and how you want another person to feel, and things that you want other people to experience. Okay. So it's from me to you. It's not just a book by itself. I think this attitude has developed in later generations. I'm not sure why, but I can't help but feel like I feel a rant coming on, and I apologize. I can't help but feel like the attitude has something to do with people's attitude towards corporate franchises. You notice people don't bat an eye when Disney buys Star Wars and then George Lucas has nothing to do with anything Star Wars after that, right? Like people have somehow in their mind separated art and artist to the point where art exists as it's like bread to them. You know, it's like bread is bread and you eat it. It's like movie is movie and you watch it. It doesn't matter who wrote it or why or what they're saying in the movie. What matters is I go and there's lasers and I eat popcorn and have fun, right? What matters is that there is a message, not who told the message. Like, this is a modern, really postmodern. It's a postmodern attitude that a painting could mean whatever we want it to mean, right? That the intent of the artist is not completely relevant when it comes to the effect on the audience. Well, I don't really believe that. Now, it can, like, I can't determine 100% what are you going to take away from this, right? In fact, I think most people miss some of the really deeper stuff with most of my fantasy, and that's fine. As long as they're entertained, I'm good. As long as they like some things about it, I'm fine. Right? I can't determine how other people are going to feel about it 100%, but I have an intent behind it, right? This is why this is the AI thing. This is why people have this like short circuit with AI. They're like, AI is going to replace writers. It's like, how on earth could an AI replace me? It's not me. It does not have my intent. It is not communicating what I want to communicate to you the way that I feel it ought to be communicated. It's like, well, AI, draw me a pretty picture. Yes. It drew you a picture that was kind of like what you asked for. It's treating art like bread. I would like to eat bread. Oh, bread is in my hand. I eat it. How many of you think about who made the bread? I don't care. I don't know. Some company made bread and put it in a bag and put it in the store, and now I eat it, right? That's how people view art now. It's really sad, but that's not the way it ought to be. And that's not the way it was in the past, for sure. Art is about me and you, an artist and an audience, and our relationship, because I'm trying to communicate something to you. When I look at a painting by Caspar David Friedrich, I'm not like, oh, here's a guy in a rock and a new moon and a weird hat and a dark, dank forest. That's what it is. No. What does the painting mean? What did Caspar David Friedrich want it to mean? Right? Some people figure this out. Like there's a famous Caspar David Friedrich painting of a guy standing on top of a mountain looking out across this foggy mountainous landscape. And a lot of people kind of like, and they pick it up because they make memes out of it. They like replace the guy with like Pepe the Frog or something on top of the mountain, right? That composition, there was an intent behind what he drew with that painting, and there's intent behind us when we write the stories. It's not just for consumption. It's not French fries, okay? Right? So if you view art as French fries, then yeah, writing a book is pointless because there's already infinite French fries that people can eat. But there's no French fries the way you would make them, right? There's no book the way that you would write it, communicating what you want to communicate that's in your heart and your mind and your soul in the way that you know you want it to be communicated, okay? AI, it can't replace me because it's not me, right? Asking an AI, write me a fantasy story in the style of David V. Stewart. Maybe it's a super advanced AI, and it's like, here, plug in David Stewart's books, boop, 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 and it comes out and it spits out a book that somehow has my style. I actually think that's impossible because I intentionally write in many different styles. There is no David V. Stewart style. Every book is going to have a little bit different style because for me, writing in the same exact style over and over again is boring. So I like to switch it up a little bit, guys. All right. But let's say it somehow does that. First of all, it would probably suck if it did that, but let's say you just like make it have the style of Needle Ash. Boom, and it comes out with a book, and you read it and you're like, okay, that was a cool story. It had a character I guess I liked, and it had a pretty girl, and like some people died. It's like, but it's not gonna, it can't understand the deeper Gnostic questions or how I presented them and asked them. And moreover, it's not going to be me telling you something. It's going to be something making a weird imitation of something I did, completely absent all the intent that I had to make it. You know, you can get an AI art program to draw a painting in the style of Waterhouse, but it won't be what Waterhouse meant. Waterhouse picked his subjects carefully. He arranged them carefully to communicate things. So if you view books as communicative, like between me and you, then yeah, you don't need to worry about the fact that there's thousands of great books. Those great books they aren't you, so it doesn't matter. They're Dostoevsky's. It's Dostoevsky communicating. I'd love to know what he thinks. Love to know what he thought was important. Because it's what he thought was important. That's part of it. It's part of his heart and soul. When you read something like The Brothers Karamazov, what is he talking about with this? It's just Russians talking to each other. Right? What are they talking about? Why do they keep talking about God? Why do they talk about atheism? Why are they talking about love? Why are they, you know? And by the way, people are like, oh, you should never just say a character is evil. Dostoevsky does it. I'm trying to remember what he said. He was sentimental. He was evil and sentimental. About Dmitry Karamazov, I think. Whatever the father was. He was sentimental. He was sentimental. He was sentimental. He was sentimental. He was sentimental and evil. Or he was evil and sentimental. I'm trying to remember what order the words came in. I'm just kind of telling you what he is. Like something about him, like he is sentimental and he is evil. That has such an impact, right? Why does that matter? You can get something to write sentences like Dostoevsky in Russian, right? It won't be his story. It can't be, right? I listen to Winter Cult while writing sometimes. That's cool. Winter Cult. I like Dungeon Synth. Yeah. It also needs a lot of punchy short sentences that communicate the speed of action. I don't know. I think complex sentences work fine too, as long as like it's clear the sequence of events. Short sentences, you can actually start to lose somebody because it's too da-da-da, 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 da-da-da. They just like lose track of what's happening because it's too much of the same thing. He turned left, he turned right, he jumped up, he jumped down. I feel like I'm reading a children's book, you know? Do you think it's worth it to create a character who knows little about the world due to age or being foreign so that they can be an excuse to explain things? Absolutely. It's called the fish out of water trope. I need to do a separate video on it. It's a great way to do exposition, actually. Fantastic way, which is why so many authors have done it. Okay, fish out of water trope, which is somebody is in the setting and doesn't know what the hell is going on. He asks the questions that the audience would ask, to which the characters who know the answers can reply and give the audience the information that they need in order to understand the context of the events. So you make the character be in the same position as the audience and be a foreigner to the story. Then you can explain things however you want. It's great, yeah. Tons of authors have done it, and it's great that way. Having someone who's not from the setting there to ask questions, yeah, it's great. Prologues are a great way to tease events and show elements that aren't pertinent to the plot. For example, Wheel of Time's prologue, one of the best prologues I've ever read in capturing your attention. So Wheel of Time's prologue is good. It also sets up the final conflict. So it's not just there for flavor, right? It's giving you a piece of the history that you're going to understand the context of later. So it leaves you with a curious thing, like, what is this? But it also is pointing to the bigger conflict with, like, the dragon reborn and the tainting of Sain. Wait, is it Sain? The male side, whatever the male side was. I think it's Sain. Or is it Saidar? It's been a while. Anyway, the tainting of that, the evil one, all of that's bound up in that prologue. So I think it's a pretty good addition to the book. The caution about prologues is making sure that they are relevant and they set things up. I love the prologue and really the whole first set of a sequence of events to Way of Kings by Brandon Sanderson. It's great. It also does some indirect exposition of the magic system, which is very relevant for the rest of the book in Sandersonian fashion. But it also gives you the view of these like archon-like beings at the beginning that you don't understand the context of until like several books into the series, like fully what's going on with those. I think maybe by the third book you have an idea of what that very first scene in Way of Kings actually was, these guys standing around with the swords, you know. So I think they're great. If you're following Elmore Leonard's advice, it would be to not write them and to just jump into the action. But I think they could be useful for piquing a reader's interest, as well as doing some exposition, setting up what they need to know for the first scene, for instance, or just piquing their interest or their curiosity. Sanderson does it with interludes, he does it with prologues, he does it with all that kind of stuff. And I've done it too. I have it in, I don't know, one of the Moonsong books. I think both of them. All of them, I think, have a prologue that does this. It's a different character in a different place doing something that matters for the plot. It's kind of showing a little bit how the world works and kind of what's at stake, right? Maybe it's a character we don't meet again, but it kind of tells you what's going on. One common method is to have a character who's new to something. Yep. Then the more experienced characters explain things to him, by extension, the audience. Brandon Sanderson does this in Mistborn, The Final Empire. That's how he explains the magic system. Is you have, what's her name? The girl and the boy. I'm forgetting the names. Anyway, she has allomancy, and so she has to be taught allomancy. And so we explain allomancy by having her, who doesn't know it yet, get taught it by a character who does know it. The hero of Half Sin. I don't remember his name now. I'm way behind on the chat, I realize. Okay, I'm going to try to catch up. For me, I like descriptions that can give an impression of a character. For example, if you have a woman with ice pick earrings or a male with a tight-looking suit, it tells you a lot about someone. I agree. You know, if the suit's over tight and the buttons are about to burst, it's like this guy eats too much. Lester Dent recommended tagging each character with memorable characteristics at first appearance, then referencing those tags each time the character reappears. This is a good way, especially for a short story. And that way, if a character reappears, they have that thing associated with them, and so you immediately remember kind of what they did beforehand. The character has dark eyes, the character wears a hat, you know, things like that. I like Brandon Sanderson's fight scenes like in Mistborn. I think they work well in Mistborn. I think they do. In general, and because the magic's involved in that, how it happens, I think, is a little more important than like two swordsmen fight each other and the one that we want to win wins, right? Aragorn fights an orc, chops his head off. Do we need a blow by that? We just need to know that Aragorn, like a big orc chieftain jumped out and then Aragorn messed him up. That's all we really need to know, right? In the third-person limited narrative, the features of the protagonist and how he or she sees themselves, I think, matters a lot. Same thing in first person, yeah. But not all features. The ones they think stand out, for better or worse. Yep, same thing in first person. That's kind of how you can control the flow of information to the reader with that, too. The tedium about it is deciding how much of those little turn the sword 30 degrees stuff you left out of the fight and convey the actual fight, yeah. I tend to describe characters. Water of Awakening is number 1. Cool. I'm glad you like it. Oh, maybe that's your number 1 book. I heard somebody say that Muramasa was like their top 5 book. I was like, wow, that's cool. For a book that like no one wanted to publish. Someone out there's going to like it. Even if like the traditional publishing market is like, who would buy this samurai book? This is weird, right? I tend to describe characters through traits other than characters notice. Yep, I think that's a good way too, right? I'll be honest, I like a good fight scene. The Cradle series by Will Wright are very much Wuxia inspired to the fights are elaborate, but they're easy to follow and have stakes to them. And the thing about watching a fight is different than reading a fight. And you can look at, there's like pulp boxing stories that have like blow by blow of boxing matches. Those might be good to look at too. I haven't looked at one in a long time, but you know, they existed because people couldn't watch boxing matches live very easily back in the 1930s. So those sorts of things existed. It might be worth checking out too. Have you ever read or written a book that had 9 to 10 pages of nothing but back and forth dialogue, like in an interrogation? I've certainly read them, right? So the Shadow of the Past chapter in Fellowship of the Ring is almost entirely back and forth dialogue between Frodo and Gandalf. Right? Almost like an interrogation, yeah. I mean, I've done stuff like that. I'm sure I have, right? All the illustrations are nice. True, I agree about the speed of duels. A lot of people got butthurt when I said that the saber duel in the Deluge was super fake because it goes on for like 2 minutes. Yeah, it wouldn't. Shiriguri, somebody knows it. No, is it Shigerui? Is it Shiriguri or I'm switching the? No, it's Shigerui. It means Death Frenzy. It's a cool anime and it's a really good manga. Like the manga's awesome if you can find it. It's like a color manga. It looks really cool. Yeah. But you get this impression that it's about like the setup, the tension, and then it's like the character does this one move, flicks his sword out, catches it on the ends of his fingers, and it's just increases the length of the blade long enough that it cuts the guy's throat. Fight over. A lot of tension with that, though. You know what I mean? Have you ever finished writing an idea ahead of schedule? If so, did it turn out just as good as anything you've written that took quite a while? I don't know. Yeah, I probably have. And probably turned out great. Just depends how much time and like how energized I am to work on it. Viewers or readers seem to like the idea that they own the story. Author doesn't matter. Yeah, I don't understand that. I don't get that at all. It's weird. Like, can you separate art and artist? Thank you for the super chat, Sound Engraver. I appreciate that. Sorry, the chat isn't letting me send anything more than $1 on super chats. I'm not sure why that is. I mean, I appreciate the dollar though. The dollar's really good. Whatever. But I appreciate that a lot. Sorry, the chat isn't. Blah, blah, blah. Is plot overrated? Why don't we see more books that have little to do with what happened and more about how it's communicated? I don't think plot's overrated. That's the event sequence. Things happen in a story. If it's just characters talking, that's not a story. This is actually one of my criticisms of Starship Troopers that people don't get. I'm not a fan of the book Starship Troopers. Starship Troopers by Robert Heinlein. I don't think it's even one of his better books. People like it for two reasons that I figured out. They like what they perceive as the politics in it, even though Heinlein was basically a shitlib and a sex freak. Or they, in real life, right? Look at who he hung out with, okay? He hung out with a bunch of pedophiles and stuff. We don't have to get too deep into that. But he definitely wrote weird stuff like Stranger in a Strange Land, which I think is a cool book, a really interesting book, but is definitely like transgressive sexual stuff. Questioning that our sexuality is like just constructed. So they like the politics that they see in it without really thinking them through or looking at history. Or they like power armor. And both of those things are kind of auxiliary to the problems I have with the book. Besides just the politics, like I don't believe the political system that he's talking about. There's no story. Like the story, there's not really much of a story to Starship Troopers. The plot, so in that case, the plot is overrated. It's all about the ideas and then power armor, which everybody stole for every little sci-fi franchise. In fact, there's power armor before Starship Troopers, as people have correctly pointed out to me. But anyway, that's where it tends to get associated with. As like Warhammer 40K exists because of Starship Troopers being popular. Like none of the philosophy from it is there. And I've talked about that book at length, but that's just my example. It's like, it's not a very interesting story to read. It's only interesting if you're really into the politics that are discussed in that dialogue fashion. Like there's this, and it's not even, it's constructed in a weird way too, where there's like these flashbacks with Rico, like talking to a teacher. It's just constructed in a weird way too. It's not constructed in a way that makes the story compelling. So if the ideas are not compelling to you on their own, or you don't like them, then you're probably not going to like the book. And if the ideas are compelling, you're going to end up liking them. And then we're having a discussion about the ideas, not the book. I don't like the way the book is written. I don't think it's an interesting or good story. And that, in fact, is why Paul Verhoeven didn't even read the book for when he made Starship Troopers. He originally wanted to make a B movie called like Bug Hunt or something. And they're like, no, you should do a Starship Troopers because it's kind of close to the story. He's like, okay. He's like, I couldn't read the story. It was too boring. It was dreadful. So I had someone summarize it for me and then wrote the script based off of that. It's like, I totally get that. Because like, if you don't like, and he's like, he looked at it and it's like, this is a bunch of fascist nonsense. He was in a concentration camp, by the way, guys. Paul Verhoeven was in a concentration camp. He was in a forced labor camp, a Nazi camp. So, yeah, I thought it was like fascist stuff. Well, the United States government was actually pretty fascist. Right? People get uncomfortable with that. We did put people in internment camps based on their race in World War II. People like to forget that history. They're like, Nazis bad and racist. I'm like, we put all the Japanese people in camps too. Yeah, we didn't kill them, right? They didn't die of typhus because of terrible conditions either. So we were better than the Nazis in that way. But we didn't have like some distinct enlightened view of race and ethnicity that allowed us to avoid the tragedy of putting people into camps based on who their ancestors were. But yeah, in that case, like, plot is overrated, but it depends on the book that you're writing. What's the plot of Brothers Karamazov, since I talked about that earlier? It's like 3 Russian brothers figure out life and love. The event sequence is pretty loose. It's more about the discussions. So in that case, yeah, plot is overrated. But for most genre fiction, which is what most people are writing, plot is not overrated. It's like the most important thing. For me, some of the best music to have in the background if I don't want to be distracted by the music is Peace by Integrity Music. I don't think I've heard it. What's up, George? Good evening. Do you or anyone here know of an actual term for cornea so dark they make distinguishing their pupils very hard unless at very close proximity? No, but I would just write that. Right? Irises so dark. We call this the iris, not just the cornea, or the corona, right? Some languages it's the corona, right? So the iris so dark that it's all black. I would just say that. I don't know of a word for it. Coal black eyes. Vin. Kelsier. Thank you. Kelsier and Vin. I just blanked on their names. It's been too long. That first Mistborn book's really good, though. I think it's a really great fantasy book to read. Sci-fi book to read. Yeah, I had eyes like coal, maybe. Glittering black beetle eyes. Now, it depends on it. Like, eyes like burning coals or like glittering black beetle eyes. Realistic or not, the sword fights in Errol Flynn and Tyrone Power movies are a lot of fun. The movies are fun. So visually watching people do lots of crazy wuxia moves is really exciting. In a book, think about how long it takes to describe that action. So I guess I just glossed over this and I'm sorry. I'll return to it. In a movie, a fight scene takes 2 minutes, let's say, for a really elaborate fight. Maybe longer. How much is your reader going to read in 2 minutes? Is he going to read all that fight in 2 minutes? Probably not. If you're describing all the stuff that's happening in a wuxia fight scene. You have to pick and choose, like the best of, the most important moves, the coolest moves. You just describe those. Kind of like how a comic book will just show kind of like the best moves. And then get on to because you just, it's a couple pages of action. Guts cuts 7 people in half with a sword. You see their blood flying in a spread. You're like, that's cool. Next thing, right? Thank you for the super chat, Sound Engraver. Maybe it was an internet connection thing on my end. I don't know. I appreciate the money. I really do. I appreciate the tip. Maybe it's a matter of taste. I prefer stuff by Joyce and Wolfe lately. James Joyce. And yes, there are things happening. And that's not the main of it. Well, I mean, if you're reading Joyce, it's really not the main thing. It's kind of a meta. I mean, like, there's like the style is present with James Joyce, right? A kind of style as a present choice. Every book is different, right? You don't have to I'm not making rules here. I'm telling you how people do it and like how you would probably want to do it, especially if you're writing genre fiction. I like a self-indulgent writer. So like if you're reading Ulysses is called like the most abandoned novel of all time. It came out in 1918, so this is like perfect in the modern era, I think. Ulysses is about the styles that are used. He's not even telling an original story, right? It's like the Odyssey, like transposed. So it's as much about the styles. It's about the style. It's the way he does it. It's the language he uses. That's what it's about. So it's I hate to use the word meta. It's used too much, but it's meta. It's a book that is a book about books, but not being directly about books. It's a story about how books are written, right? It's weird. It has that meta layer to it, and that's what makes it interesting. I've only read it one time, but maybe I could return to it at some point, do some content on it. Verhoeven saw the war as an exhilarating adventure at the time. He was a young boy and has since compared himself to Bill Rowan in Hope and Glory. I don't know about that. The way you feel about Starship Troopers is how I feel about the last book of the Foundation series. Oh, yeah. The Isaac Asimov thing. Way too many philosophical diatribes for the first 80 pages. Right. James Joyce's love letters to his wife are a wild read. I have not read them. Maybe I ought to. Maybe that might be fun. So this is a thing that happens in a lot of sci-fi. You just end up trying to write the philosophy. I mean, it's the core component of Atlas Shrugged, which is actually a sci-fi novel when you stop and think about it. It would be loosely in the sci-fi genre. It has all the sci-fi tropes that you might expect of modernist sci-fi, but it's really about the characters delivering speeches about all the stuff that Ayn Rand believed in. Ayn Rand. I always say Ayn Rand. Is it Ayn or Ann? Ayn Rand. Whatever she believed in. That's the content of the book. And the plot is there to set up those speeches so that they have context and meaning. The plot is not the core feature of it. But if you're writing detective fiction, what's the core feature of detective fiction? It's the plot. So it depends what kind of book you're writing, right? So, yeah, James Joyce is not writing detective fiction. If he was applying what he did in Ulysses to a detective novel, it would be unreadable. I mean, some people think Ulysses is unreadable anyway. It would be so bad. Be so bad. Just depends what you're writing. That's all, man. It's your book, it's your project, whatever you're writing. So just do what you do with intent. That's the main thing. Like artistic intent, what am I going to communicate to you with this book? What are you communicating? How do you want to communicate it? What's the focus? Right? Is the focus the philosophy? Then the plot serves the philosophy, right? Like in Brothers Karamazov. The conflict serves the philosophical point you're trying to make, like in 1984. Okay? There's no one way you have to do it. It's your book. Do it your way. I'm just giving advice. Hey, what's up, Adrian? I haven't commented, but I've been listening for a while working. You made some great points about writing action. I'll have to go back later and shorten, remove some action scenes in the novel I'm working on. If you're still doing a light novel, I would definitely keep the action pretty light. Light novels I've seen, they don't gloss over action, but they describe it in kind of bigger than life terms. Things happen and then people move on. Verhoeven wasn't in a camp during the war. His family were on good terms with the German government. Well, maybe I'm wrong. His street got bombed by the Allies, though, and a relative of his died from it. Yeah, maybe I'm wrong. But yeah, I heard he was in a camp in World War II. All right, let's go ahead and move on. I have talked about, I'll summarize, I've talked about exposition. Exposition as a setting should move you towards understanding the conflict, the characters who are involved, and what you need to know about the setting for the event sequence to begin. Ideally, it should be fairly short so that you get kind of things rolling along. The exposition section in a play is not entirely exposition. There's also actions happening during that section. So you should do the same thing when you're writing. You should reveal the things which are necessary to understand the events in any form of exposition. Exposition may occur throughout a book. Exposition is where you are revealing information to the reader or to the audience that they need to know in order to understand the context of the events. Motivations, what's possible, what's impossible in a given setting, attitudes, appearances, all those things constitute exposition. Okay. That's exposition. Direct and indirect exposition. Direct exposition is, this is how it is. He was sentimental. He was evil and sentimental. All right. And a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, there was an evil empire, right? Once upon a time, that's direct exposition. You're sort of telling it directly. Indirect exposition is where you're just showing it the whole time and the reader kind of has to piece it together, like what Stephen Erickson does in the Malazan books. He just shows you lots of things happening and like you have to figure out what these what these warrens are and like how you channel them and like how mages work. You figure that out by watching the characters do stuff. If you're going to do indirect exposition, it's really good to be pretty clear about what characters are doing and how they do it. Brandon Sanderson uses a lot of indirect exposition, where he just kind of peppers in the relevant stuff, just attaching it to what the character's doing. The character used his second lashing. All right, what is that? Well, we show what it does. And then everything flew up to the ceiling. Oh, well, that's cool. So he has some magic that does that, and it's called the second lashing, right? And you can kind of cleverly split the difference with characters doing dialogue exposition, like, again, with Brandon Sanderson and Mistborn. You have a character who doesn't know being explained things by a character who does know. It disguises the fact that you're doing what is, in essence, direct exposition. You're just doing it through the dialogue of a character, right? Okay, so that's basically what exposition is. And exposition can also be like past events that are needed to understand things. So, you know, Frodo and Gandalf talking about where the ring came from would be a form of exposition, because it's not the main sequence of the book. Okay, should be all it is. All right, let's. How much time do we have left? Oh man, I went way long. I have like 15 minutes. I wanted to do another live write. I didn't get to do one this last week, and I didn't get to do one during the week or the weekend. And I don't want to do them like at random times where no one is going to be around, but maybe that's what we'll have to do, because I'm going to need to go here pretty soon. Yeah, let's see if we can do like 15 minutes. How much can we write in 15 minutes? I have to figure out where I was in the story. All right, we'll read it. We'll read it and refresh ourselves and see how much we can write. Let's see here. Get this set up. Sorry, I have like a camera like right in the middle of my screen. It's very weird to look at. Okay, that'll probably work. All right, that'll work. Okay. I'm going to have to move this camera because it's like right in the middle of my document. Like I can't see what I'm writing here. Get the old reading glasses on. There we go. That'll work for now. All right. All right, yeah, here's a kind of an interrogation here, right? I will tell you what I think is true. You were made by Murdrag, or else purchased by him and put to work. But inside you survive some memory, some small thing, perhaps, that remains human. And to that end, you have your own will. You are yourself, though you cannot remember it. The usurper is not as skilled as he thinks. I believe there is a change you could. I believe there's a change you could be made whole. I believe there is a way. Let's do a way you could be made whole. Murdrag will have kept some part of the ritual to bind you to this realm, but maybe not. If not, would you have us slay you so that you could at least have a chance at release? I pondered this. I would be whole, but not for my own sake, for one I love, but Murdrag has her. The plot thickens, but that is well. How do you intend to get her back? By providing the heart of the boy. Yes, but you didn't do that. Then I don't know. You could kill Murdrag, Runelin said. Would you kill the man who enslaved you? If he really did so. Well, since you can think, Argenti said, you must consider whether he did. Either way, do you think he deserves death, holding your loved one as hostage? Yes. Perhaps you can use him, Runelin. This may be the opportunity we've hoped for since your father delivered you into my care. The same nature that makes him so ethereal here will work against his master now that he has free will. Now, what did I call him? Call him like a gray man. Right. Empty. Yeah, half man, right? could we offer him? Must have life before money matters, right? It's true. Where's my chat? I lost it. There it is. Put that over here. What is this asking? Do you never have guest combos on these? I don't do it as much anymore. Sometimes I have guests on. It just depends. When I did it really intensely, like I'm gonna have everybody's gonna be guests, like plugging stuff, like my viewership plummeted to nothing. People weren't interested, so I had to, I had to reformat the show because people weren't interested in watching it. That's all. Sometimes I'll have them on. It just depends. Just depends. Bye, Neil. Can a character use as you know if it's done well? I wouldn't. Every time I see it, I'm like, it just doesn't come off well. But you would do it only if, like, I don't know. There's probably a way to do it well, but I just avoid doing things like that if I can. I just avoid it. All right, 8 more minutes. Does he mention his name? Oh, we'll just look it up. Xander. Boop. Oh, yes. All right, so, yes, we have his name. It's an X. What do I compare it to? Have I used as you know? I don't know if I have. If I have, I apologize. It's not intentional, but I like most of the time when it's used, it's like, as you will know, this is the way things work. Right. You can only, I mean, you'd only use it if it was like somebody really like testing limits and not in an expositional fashion. Anyway, it's 8:31. I probably need to go. Let's see how much I wrote. How much that? All right. 400 words. Hey, it's something. We'll do another live write soon, though. Okay? But I got to get going. We've had 2 hours. So have a good one, guys. Put up some more music. Don't forget the No Talkie Talkie channel. Which I don't think I'm broadcasting on the No Talk. Maybe I am. If I am, it's unintentional. But I'll go ahead and link it. The music channel. No Talkie Talkies. I have a whopping 133 subscribers. Love to get that up higher. So, anyway, guys, take it easy, and I will see you all next time. pull up some music here. What do we want? Vapor, puddles. People like puddles. Now we'll do C. Yeah, here we go. Something really relaxed. All right. I have a good one. Newest book. I think I only put out one book last year. It's a very off year. I had so many other projects, including like renovations and things. So it's Demon Ex Machina. I don't have a copy here, but you actually can get it for free if you get on my mailing list. dvspress.com/free-book, and that will actually get you on my mailing list and get you a free ebook of Demon Ex Machina about demonic AI. Fun little story I wrote last year, horror story. So have fun with that, and I'll see you all next time.